Hello, it's Big Cheds. I'm back with another chapter of My Battles with Cancer, a patient and caregiver's candid memoir. This is my story as I fought cancer. My mother fought cancer, and then I grieved her loss after she passed. And I originally published it on Amazon, and I republished it last year, and recently completed the audiobook. And now even though it's available on Amazon, I want the whole book to be free. I want it to be available to anybody who's a caregiver or a patient, and it might help them, or even someone who's grieving the loss of a loved one. I want my book to be there for them. I've also published two other books. You might have heard of them, Trading Quotes and Trading Wisdom. I'm, of course, Big Cheds on Twitter, and this is Cheds Trading on YouTube. We're right up to the end of the book. It's been quite a journey, and I thank you folks who've been here. So we're at 2-year mark. We just did the gift. We talked about that amazing moment where my mom reached out and connected my aunt and I. So we're at 2-year mark. Let's talk about that. So 2-year mark. On a snowy winter day in the middle of January, after spending the evening hanging out with a friend, I decided to take a bath to relieve and to relax my aching muscles. In addition to shoveling and using a snowblower earlier that day, I had been moving around some bulky objects in the garage, and my muscles were pretty sore as a result. After drawing a bath that was too hot, I stood there waiting for the water to cool down, and that's when I decided to check my body for strange growths, as I occasionally do and had been doing after my treatments ended. While searching around, I noticed a bulge in the lower left abdomen area, just across from where I had radiation 19 months prior. I pushed and poked around at this growth to see what I was dealing with, and from what I could tell, it seemed to be just short of the size of a ping pong ball. Trying to figure out what was going on, I checked the other side of my abdomen, and I didn't find anything similar, and I immediately began to worry. Was this a new blank moment as it had been when I discovered the tumor in my armpit? For the last few months, I had been living a happy-go-lucky life, looking past the cancer treatment. However, some piece of me was still holding back since I had not yet reached that 2-year mark. Looking deep inside, I asked myself why I was holding back, and I wondered if it was because something like this could happen. Pushing around again and feeling that lump move a little bit, I feared that I would soon be writing about the start of a new cancer journey. Standing there in the bathroom and looking down upon that tub of hot water, many questions were swirling through my mind. And first I wondered if I should call the hospital. Then I wondered if it made a difference that I had caught it so early on, if it was indeed cancer. I also wondered if it would be stage 1 or stage 3 like before. I was in full-blown panic mode at that point, and I remembered something the doctor had told me. He said that if the cancer comes back, they would have to treat it with something more severe than chemotherapy, something involving stem cell treatment. And honestly, that scared the crap out of me. In this dark moment, I tried to summon up courage, and I told myself I would beat this cancer again if it indeed was cancer. However, I was honest. I also admitted that it would diminish me to the point where I would come out as a poor facsimile of my current self. Then I realized that Mom would not be there to support me as she had been before, and that made the prospect of a cancer relapse seem infinitely more challenging. My carefree nature was quickly fading away. I thought about how I'd been planning to travel that year, but now that was up in the air. Thinking about my calendar, I also remembered I had a 3-month checkup coming up, and I debated if I should call the doctor or just wait. And lastly, I considered the possibility that this bulge in my abdomen could just be a muscle or some other natural tissue. My hip and groin muscles were really tight and sore after a physically active day, so it was possible, but still, I was preparing for the worst. All of the above flashed through my mind in a matter of seconds. And then I added some cold water to the bath and I slowly entered. I did my best to relax, but I was still freaking out inside after going over all the different scenarios for what might happen next. After a few minutes of soaking and trying to relax, I checked my abdomen again and I could not find that bulge. And I thought maybe it was because I was laying down as opposed to standing up. Still fearing the worst, I was tempted to get out of the bath and check again, but I forced myself to stay there and to enjoy the hot water. About 15 minutes later, I decided that it was time to face the music, so I got out to see if the bulge was still there. Again, I poked and prodded, first on my left side and then the right side of my abdomen. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't find anything. But still, I did not want to let my guard down until I knew for sure it had been a false alarm. That type of panic does not go away so easily. As I laid down in bed that night, I thought about telling my wife, but I really did not want to worry her. After all, the lump had gone away, and I was going to check the next day anyway to be sure. When I woke up the following morning, I noticed that it was indeed gone, and I concluded that my imagination had gotten the best of me. And I breathed a great sigh of relief before telling my wife about the whole ordeal. That experience made me think about how vulnerable I was and how it was still understandable that I had been holding back from celebrating until I had finally reached that 2-year mark. Though my hair was already back to the length it had been before my cancer diagnosis, I was not back to my old emotional self yet. This episode was a great illustration of that. Once again, it was time for me to head into the hospital for my 3-month post-treatment checkup. And I was quite looking forward to it so I could talk to my doctor and discuss my recent digestive issues. After my hospital visit back in June, I committed myself to making some lifestyle changes, and for the most part, they had made a difference as I lost weight and I had fewer bouts of severe indigestion. However, after Thanksgiving, I had another severe attack, so I decided to meet with a GI specialist. She recommended that I have my gallbladder removed. That procedure is called a cholecystectomy. According to Wikipedia, a cholecystectomy is the surgical removal of the gallbladder. Cholecystectomy is a common treatment of symptomatic gallstones and other gallbladder conditions. In 2011, cholecystectomy was the 8th most common operating room procedure performed in hospitals in the United States. Cholecystectomy can be performed either laparoscopically using a video camera or via an open surgical technique. Citation. After scheduling this for early December, I continued on with my new diet, and soon enough, I was back to normal, eating healthy and feeling strong. So as the date of my operation approached, the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if it was really necessary. With that in mind, as I was heading in to see my medical oncologist for that 3-month checkup, I planned on discussing with him the situation. Once I had checked in, a gentleman who was at the front desk asked me if I had been on any international travel recently. And I joked, and I responded by saying, "Oh, other than Wuhan, China, no." This was just at the beginning of the COVID virus scare. And dutiful as ever, this staff member took me seriously. And then I gave up the game, and we both had a laugh about it. Though I was in a good mood that day, as reflected by my apparent attempt at humor, I still felt a little guilty for making that guy's life harder. After finishing the check-in process and having my blood drawn, I went to meet with the oncologist. The waiting area for my doctor was broken up into smaller sections. So, other than me, there was space for perhaps 4 or 5 more people and a little bit of standing room in between. This day, it was rather busy, so I grabbed one of the few available seats near what turned out to be a family, joined in support of this young man who had recently been diagnosed with cancer. This young man was slight in stature and wearing a navy blue Red Sox baseball cap. And he was accompanied by 3 older folks, 2 of whom were probably his parents, and the other one an aunt, in my estimation. Not wanting to intrude, I opened up my laptop and I worked on this book while they chatted. And soon enough, that young man left to have his vital signs taken. As he came back, he was reunited with his family, and I stopped for a moment to consider the plight of this young and healthy-looking individual. From my estimation, he had just received his diagnosis and was soon to start treatment. And I felt terrible for him, as all across his face was a look of defeat, fear, and vulnerability. Moments later, this young man's grandmother joined the group, and she stood there with her arms extended, offering to hug the new patient. As the rest of the family warmly greeted this petite gray-haired lady, the young man stayed in his chair, and he refused to get up to hug her. After a while, she retracted her arms and continued with what seemed to be an effort to show support for her grandson. In some ways, I understood what he was going through after his recent diagnosis. He was mad, he was defensive, and he felt vulnerable. He likely felt as if everything was unfair, and with such a wounded heart, it was difficult for him to return the offer of a hug from his grandmother. Soon enough, this young man's name was called, and a nurse led him and his family back to the examination room. Once my name was called, I had my vital signs taken, and I was proud of the fact that I guessed within 3 digits my exact blood pressure, including both the upper and lower numbers, which meant that it had been consistent. In addition to that, my weight was healthy, having stabilized at nearly 30 pounds lower than the heights of my post-chemotherapy recovery period. For sure, I was feeling good. The nurse soon escorted me into the examination room, where I waited for the doctor, and then he walked in and asked me something that really made my day. With a big smile on his face, he said, "Do you feel as good as you look?" And I emphatically responded, yes, thanking him for the question. Quote, "Had another 3-month checkup today, and the oncologist asked me if I felt as good as I looked," which was an awesome thing for him to ask. Answer was yes. February 3rd, 2020 at Big Cheds. Hearing him say those words was a wonderful validation of everything I had been doing to live healthy and to take care of myself emotionally over the last few months. After talking about a few other matters, we discussed the gallbladder and stomach issues I had been dealing with until recently. Citing my good health, I asked the doctor what he thought about canceling my upcoming gallbladder surgery and instead just continuing with my current diet modifications. Once he did a physical examination, he said that as long as my symptoms did not return, then I should be fine to continue on as is. After my initial issues and that trip to the emergency room, I removed almost all saturated fat from my diet, and slowly but surely, my symptoms went away, and I even lost weight. So even though I was almost certain that I was on top of the problem, I still asked the doctor to schedule an ultrasound so I could be sure that my gallbladder had recovered. It was critically important for me to confirm that I was indeed making the right decision in canceling that surgery. Pardon me. Sorry about that. The doctor happily accommodated my request, putting an order in the computer for me. And with that out of the way, I asked him about the last thing in my mind, the upcoming 2-year anniversary of completing my cancer treatment. With only 6 months to go until I reached that target, I asked the doctor what the plan would be going forward should I make it the next 6 months without a relapse, that is. And reconfirming that after 2 years post-treatment, the risk of cancer returning is extremely low, he told me that it really never reaches 0. After hitting the 2-year mark, he explained I would start coming to the hospital every 6 months rather than every 3 months for my regular checkups. And then every year until I reached the 5-year mark. After the 5-year mark, which I've passed now, which is awesome. After the 5-year mark, if I was lucky enough to make it that far, we would decide on a new plan. Either my primary care doctor would keep an eye on me, or I would continue to come back every year to see the oncology team at the hospital. In my mind, I had believed that after 2 years, the cancer risk would be 0. And it would be completely gone. And though I was slightly disappointed to hear that I would still be coming back for at least 5 years, the 2-year mark continued to hold a great deal of significance for me, as I had been wanting to celebrate officially beating cancer, but I had been holding back until I reached that 2-year mark. Wanting to end the visit on a positive note, I again thanked him for that wonderful comment, and I left to go schedule that ultrasound. And when that appointment rolled around, I drove into the hospital with great enthusiasm, excited to find out if I had really made the right decision in canceling that gallbladder surgery. Once my name was called, a man in his early 50s with a cheerfully disarming smile brought me into the EKG room. He reminded me of the typical guy you might run into at a barbecue, wearing a tank top, drinking a beer, and holding a plate with 4 cheeseburgers on it. Before we began the procedure, he asked me about my gallbladder issues, starting back from when I was first admitted to the ER. And I was a little curious. Why was he asking me all these questions? The prior EKG technician had just done her job and sent me along, and even followed procedure by refusing to tell me what she saw on the scan. This technician seemed much more friendly and was interested in my medical case. So, based on that fact, I was hoping he would share with me his thoughts when the scan was complete. Once I finished giving him my backstory on my stomach problems, he explained that both his father and grandfather had their gallbladders removed, and he figured that he too would eventually have to have his removed, and he wanted to know what some of the early warning signs were. So now that we had a basic level of familiarity, I asked him if he would share his thoughts about the test when he was done, and thankfully he said yes. About 20 minutes or so after 20 or so minutes of him moving the gel-laden sensor all around the right side of my abdomen, the procedure was complete, and the technician gave me the stunning news. My gallbladder was completely normal. He looked at my EKG from when I was first admitted to the ER and confirmed that whatever had been causing problems then was gone. I could not believe that the doctors had almost removed a perfectly normal gallbladder from my body. I couldn't believe it. All my diet modifications had paid off. Hearing this news gave me an incredible thrust of positive energy, and I left the hospital that day with wind in my sails and pep in my step. Later that night, I had an email exchange with my oncologist, and he confirmed what the technician had told me. He also gave me some props for living a healthy life and stressed how important it was to keep an eye on my symptoms going forward. Slowly but surely, the 1-year anniversary of Mom's passing arrived, and in the days leading up to it, I found myself becoming increasingly emotional. At first, I tried to deny that this anniversary had any meaning for me at all. I told others that I had been mourning mom every day, and so this day would be no different. However, as that date arrived, my emotions could no longer be ignored. There was a dark cloud hanging over me. This conflict with my emotions was only compounded by my work on this cancer memoir. And it just so happened that I was editing the last days of mom's life in the book as the 1 year anniversary of her death approached. There was absolutely no hiding from thinking about mom. Though I was aware of my hampered emotional state, I just could not stop myself from being crabby to my family, nor from pushing them away as I stewed in my own miserable juices. Paying respect to mom, I decided to build a big fire and just let it burn all day in her honor. My aunt planned on coming over later that day as well to perform a small ceremony with me, so I had some time to build and enjoy the fire by myself before she arrived. After gathering several large piles of wood, I began, and once I had built up a nice base of burning embers, I sat back in my Adirondack chair, I pulled out my laptop, and I did some work on this cancer memoir. Once I had my fill of that, I put the computer away, stoked the fire, and added several new logs. Staring at the flames, I wanted to believe that mom was part of them, part of nature, and everything around me. I wanted to reach out, to feel her essence, but when I thought of her, it was like trying to move a phantom limb. The connection that was once so strong was now shut off and would never come back, no matter how many times I looked for her in the flames. Needing to hear her voice so I could imagine her with me, I pulled out my phone and I scrolled through the voicemails I had saved, ultimately finding one from exactly 2 years to the day before she died. I was pretty excited about finding it, and I thought to myself that little did either of us know at the time just how important that day would become. As I played the message, her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. She asked about my daughter and a recent knee surgery, showing great concern, loving, and care. It was a wonderful blessing to have these memories of her saved, to have her voice preserved, so I could, at a moment's notice, summon her to join me and to tell me a story. My aunt came by a little while later, and by then the fire was a blazing inferno. That was a nice touch and represented the vitality of the love that both my aunt and I shared for mom. We sat and we spoke to her, summoning mom's spirit. Together we sent our love as we held on to one of her favorite blankets, and I wanted to completely let go of my anger and sadness so I could live in the moment and properly pay my respects, but I was still conflicted, and that made it a lot more difficult to do so. After my aunt left, I kept that fire going late into the night, constantly adding fuel in an homage to mom's spirit. The following morning, I started the fire back up again, using the still hot embers, and spent much of the day enjoying the flames and thinking about mom. Oh, how I missed her. Oh, how I still miss her. In the middle of this growing worldwide panic, with governments telling people to stay at home during the COVID crisis, I thought a lot about those who were vulnerable and had pre-existing conditions. Back when I was going through chemotherapy, my immune system reached nadir, and during that period, I remembered being afraid of touching a doorknob, a light switch, or a counter. I was unbelievably vulnerable then, as this virus would have easily killed me. And that's why I really felt so bad for those who were going through cancer treatment during the COVID crisis. Blessed with many nice days outside, I was able to get a lot done in the yard, and that helped me to stay in shape. And psychologically, I also benefited from the time under the sun as well. The warmer weather also continued the process of drying everything out. And this was just as I continued my process of gathering brush from the edges of the property to pay homage to Mother Nature with my evenings by the fire. The days when it rained were a blessing, as they allowed me to stay inside and to not feel guilty about neglecting the many projects I had so ambitiously started for myself around the yard. Those days I sat under a blanket as the clouds emptied upon us, with my feet on the ottoman and fingers on the laptop, working feverishly on this cancer memoir. The progress I tasted was sweet, as I was full of emotion and full of inspiration and drive. Less than 2 months to go until I reached that finish line. With my final 3-month checkup approaching, I wondered if my appointment was also going to be virtual or if it was too important to do that way. This date had been on my calendar for more than a year and marked that all-important 2-year milestone. Doing it remotely would be a real letdown. I had been holding back from celebrating cancer until I reached that 2-year mark, and I really wanted to celebrate it with the hospital staff. April rain brought May flowers, and the seedlings we started were taking off. Some of them were ready to go into the ground, and others into larger pots to help build up their root systems before planting. As I was preparing to start a second round of plantings, I rifled through a plastic Ziploc bag containing all my seeds. That is when I found a small packet with some writing on it. Pulling it out for closer examination, I realized that it was Mom's writing. Her words cut me to the bone and brought her back to life for a sweet and sour moment. Emotions poured through me as the missing intensified, and I realized that I was barreling down a deep hole of misery before pulling back and rejecting that easy vice. That experience reinforced in my mind the idea that though hidden most days, these barbed wire feelings can come flooding back at any moment. Almost anything can be the trigger. That episode also got me thinking about how I'd been looking around in nature for signs of Mom and searching for her when I was lost in my grief. A great example of this is about a week before she passed, and we were driving home from the hospital, and I saw an outline of angels in the clouds. In that trying moment, it had brought me great comfort to think that they were coming for my angel, Mom. And then again, just a couple of days before Mom passed away, as my aunt and I were lovingly watching over Mom, and I felt that strong sense that there were angels in the room with us, also watching over Mom and preparing to take her with them. Then, right at the end, when I was so worried about watching Mom die that I wouldn't let myself fall asleep, and I eventually fell asleep, and just before waking up and seeing her no longer breathing, Mom reached out to me in a dream and let me know that she was happy and was celebrating the circle of life with my beautiful new nephew. And then, finally, that inexplicable phone call with my aunt, where she swears that she heard my voice on the phone. Did Mom reach out from beyond the grave to make sure my aunt and I talked? Honestly, I really cannot explain it any other way. Ever since that experience, I've been looking at things a little differently, and I'm perhaps a little more open to the supernatural and other things that we cannot fully explain. What happened was an amazing gift, and Mom let us know that she was there and was thinking about us, and for that, I will forever be grateful. Pushing on as I was apt to do, I got an email later from the hospital announcing that my all-important appointment would indeed be held over the phone due to the COVID crisis. Processing this news, a feeling of disappointment began to settle in as I realized that I would not be able to see the hospital staff, nor would I have the benefit of a blood test to confirm that I was still on the right track. Furthermore, driving into the hospital for my checkup had always served as a behavioral carrot on a stick. In the days leading up to these appointments, I tended to follow a healthier than normal routine, knowing that I was soon going to have to account for my physical condition. Tuesday rolled around and it was time for my appointment, and I did a little bit of work around the yard before receiving a phone call early in the afternoon from the nurse practitioner. On the other line was someone who had been involved in my care from the very beginning, and she sounded genuinely glad to hear my voice. I was also glad to hear her voice. We began a fluid and frank conversation about my health and how my family and I were handling the process of homeschooling our daughter. At first, I brought up the problem of our daughter not having enough social interaction, and I explained that we were attempting to bridge that gap with video chats and walks around the neighborhood. Unprompted, she said that my wife and I should have no problem homeschooling our daughter, given how highly she regarded both of our intellects. Though her comment was well received, it was also slightly embarrassing. Reviewing my case file, she asked if I've been having any digestive issues, and I told her no. I told her that the diet modifications had been paying off. As the candid conversation continued to flow, we talked about what it's like for a cancer patient after they complete all of their chemotherapy and radiation treatments. We discussed the challenge they face adapting to their new life. When you go into the hospital every few weeks for treatment, the pace and the predictability of those treatments can be comforting. And when it's over, the patient often struggles with the loss of structure. In her view, she said, that is when it gets hard for the patient. And in response, I told her that I completely understood what she was saying. But for me, there was no challenge of that sort. This cancer book, this cancer memoir, this book project had become my structure, with me working on it and thinking about it almost every day for the last 2 years. I also told her that once this book project was finished, in roughly a month, I would be able to move on with my life and do something new. Completing and publishing this book would allow me, in some ways, to come to final terms with my treatment and recovery period. With that said, it would hopefully no longer dominate my daily life, I told her. Then the nurse practitioner said she understood and then offered up the metaphor of an older man constantly talking and thinking about his time in college playing football. She said we have to move on and focus on the challenges that currently lay before us, rather than reliving our past over and over again. I responded by saying that one should not bury the past either. Speaking with conviction, I told her that if we ignore or try to run from those feelings and memories, they will only fester up and become a bigger problem later. So that it's best to find a balance between facing them and leaving them in the past. Then, that's when things started to get interesting. And she asked me if I had been experiencing any recent weight loss, any night sweats or fevers. And it was satisfying to report that I had not. She then took a deep breath and musingly told me, quote, upon reoccurrence, large cell lymphoma rapidly causes problems within the body. so that I would know, end quote, so that I would notice it right away. Most importantly, she said, it is safe to say that my lymphoma is likely in the rear view mirror. Hearing her say that was an incredible boon, salving somewhat my disappointment about not going over to the hospital to celebrate that 2-year milestone. And on that note, she explained that the hospital was trying to minimize the number of people entering the building each day so that as long as I felt healthy, there was no need for me to come in for that appointment. Wrapping things up, we made plans for another appointment in 3 months, and then I would go into the hospital for blood tests and a physical examination, assuming that things were a little bit more normal with COVID. It was great to talk to her and to finally have that appointment that I'd been thinking about for the last 3 months. And though it was only over the phone, I felt that it had been valuable and had offered me some excellent points to reflect upon. Most of all, her comment about the lymphoma being in the rearview mirror stuck with me, and that gave me a great boost of accomplishment and satisfaction as I looked to put the finishing touches on this book. With the strong positive momentum from that phone call, I knew that I would be able to wrap up this story in a way that was satisfying to me and I hoped to the reader as well. Now, exactly 2 years to the day since my last cancer treatment, I am publishing this book, ready to share with the world my journey. Also, ready to move on to some new and exciting adventures. As I move forward, I will continue to look for Mom in the wind, in the trees, and in the fire, hoping that she reaches out to me again. I love you, Mom. Good luck in your journey, and may you too be granted wisdom, patience, and good fortune as you go forward and face your battles. Cheds. The end. How about that? We did it. There's still a couple ending chapters, which are minor chapters about stories of inspiration and citations. I'll do that next. But this is my battles with cancer. This is my story. I published it 2 years after and completed my treatments, and now we're 3 years past that. I've been doing other stuff, and then I went back and I rewrote the book. I re-edited it. I took like a third of the book out. I cleaned it up, and then I recorded the audiobook, and that took me like 8 months, and that was like quite a thing. And now I'm basically done with the YouTube, and I've been thinking about doing this for years, and now this is basically done, and I'm incredibly proud of that. I want this book to be available to anybody who it might help, anyone going through cancer, anyone who knows someone who's going through cancer, and anybody who's maybe grieving the loss of a loved one. I share my experiences, hoping that they help other people, and that's what we're doing here on YouTube at Cheds Trading. Of course, I'm Big Cheds on Twitter. My other two titles, Trading Quotes, Trading Wisdom, also available on Amazon. So, folks, thank you so much. I will be back with that final chapter, which is basically just citations. But thank you. I really appreciate everybody who's been here. And I'll talk to you soon, okay? Take care, and thank you again.